Welcome to the Deep Dive Lab. This week, our guest is Jonathan Kurniawan. He is the Chief Product Officer at Prodago, helping companies and AI teams develop capabilities towards responsible AI. Previously, he led data science at Bukalapak, driving data driven culture and advancing machine learning applications. He currently is a research lead at Center of AI and Digital Policy, advocating technology that promotes broad social inclusion based on fundamental rights, democratic institutions, and the rule of law. He's also a contributor for Humanity, a nonprofit volunteer-led organization building audit criteria for responsible development of AI. Thank you for joining us here on the show.
Thank you, Sinta.
Yeah, and obviously this is really exciting because you are also my brother.
That's right.
So how does it feel to be in a podcast hosted and produced by a show by your sister?
It feels great. I heard your first few podcasts with your first guest, and I'm really excited to share some stuff today.
Yeah, I'm also really excited. For listeners out there who don't know, we actually recorded this entire episode 3 times. This is the third time we're doing it.
I have three different
And the
countries.
reason, yeah, the first one you did it in Montreal, second one was in Dubai, and now you're in Indonesia,
Jakarta.
Jakarta. And the reason is the first time we did it, the thing is, listeners can't see, but if you're smiling or if you're laughing, I can see it. But listeners can't. And you have a very monotone, like monotonous voice. So people don't know if you're laughing or if you're smiling. So for this time, can you please, at least when you laugh or smile, please laugh audibly?
Ahaha.
I
Yes.
I need more than
Yes.
a haha.
Yes.
Okay, great. See, right now, he's literally smiling, but listeners can't see this. Okay, okay. I just want people to know that you're having a really good time and you're not miserable.
I'm not miserable at all. It's midnight, but I'm not miserable at all. Recounting my third podcast with my sister that we recorded 3 times
Uh,
talking about
Thank you
AI.
for confirming.
Can you hear
Yes.
my excitement? My God.
Thank you for confirming. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you in this
Oh
podcast.
my God.
Okay, so I want to explore your journey towards to where you are here today, which is this, CPO in ethical AI. I know before you did computer science for your undergrad, and then you worked as a sound engineer at Dolby, and then you got your MBA and you did your master's in disruptive innovation, and then you led a team of, a large team of data scientists, and now you're finally the chief product officer at a company that does ethical AI. But I know when you were really young, you wanted to be an inventor. I would often see you come out of the bathroom where you would mix my shower, my shower shampoo, my conditioner, my face wash, and my body gel, and you would come out and say, "Hey, Jesse, I have combined all four and have made an all-in-one solution." So obviously, I can't use any of them, despite us throwing the products away. We encouraged your curiosity, nevertheless. What happened there? Why aren't you becoming an inventor anymore? Have you always wanted to become an inventor? And when did that sort of dream change?
It didn't change. What are you talking about?
You're still an
I'm
inventor.
inventing.
Yeah,
No,
I mean,
yes, I
yeah,
always
like
wanted to
so.
be an inventor. So yes, I always wanted to be an inventor. When I was a kid, I really liked sci-fi movies. I
Mhm.
watched Cartoon Network, Dexter's Laboratory. I thought it was really cool. He added a bunch of chemicals. I thought I could do the same with soaps and shampoos, and nothing happened out of it, of course. But that was always interesting to try things out. And yeah, I think that invention inventor mindset's kind of still alive today because I really want to make sure that we can build something that's actually useful for people.
Mhm. By the way, I love your energy. I was gonna say, love this. So excited! I'm too excited. Okay, so you're kind of inventing stuff now. How did you stumble upon ethical AI? It's a very niche field.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a growing field, especially when AI is going to be a bit more mainstream. So when you see things like ChatGPT, that's captured the imagination of everyone, really has, I think, one of the fastest growing user bases of all time, reached 1 million people in 5 days, right? So it really captures the imagination of an entire generation, and I think people are starting to realize the power of AI and the power that AI can actually help unlock in our lives in everywhere because it's really can be applied in all sorts of domains. So, once something that's a technology that's that powerful becomes that mainstream, it will always have things that you have to check and make guardrails against to make sure that it's going to be useful and be responsibly created and responsibly executed to help humanity, let's say. So,
Mm-hmm.
I was in the world of data science when I was in the US doing my MBA. At the time, I was working at Open Data Science Conference. And over there, I was speaking with a bunch of data scientists, and I wanted to really understand the exciting world of AI and data. And the keynote speaker there was a professor who was actually just talking about, the concerns of AI and automation bias and bias that can creep in on the data sets that we use if we're not being careful. That was very interesting to me because that really is a subset or an intersection, I would say, of many different fields of study. So then what you would have is you have computer scientists and data scientists and the statisticians, of course, in the AI camp, also with the business builders and product builders who are helping them build the AI systems. But then also, once you talk about responsible AI, since it affects the larger society, you're involving the social sciences, sociology, then you're putting in legal, what type of policies you want, what type of cultures you want to build from those policies, right? And you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're building is all to make, you have to balance these two things. The first is making the world a better place, of course, with progressing and making sure that these systems and AI systems are not going to be abusing. But also, you don't want to stifle innovation. So you don't want to be giving too many guardrails against, oh, I can't do this, you can't do that, because innovation goes faster than the speed of law, right? So that was a very fascinating problem for me, and that's where I am today.
Yeah. I was also going to mention actually that, I have been looking for the AI person, somebody who is not only very knowledgeable in AI, but lives, breathes AI. And you are the first name that pops up in my head. Not only are you very knowledgeable in AI, but you're also really passionate about AI. So I'm really excited to talk about AI with you. Let's jump straight in. There's a lot to unpack here. I want to talk a lot about like ChatGPT, about deepfakes, about just the potential biases in AI and how to solve them, especially from your ethical lens as well. So before we start, though, let's define what artificial intelligence is. So, in your words, what is artificial intelligence?
So AI, when you're contrasting that with traditional software engineering is basically you telling the computer what to do by instructions. Whereas with AI, you're telling the computer what to do via examples. And the examples come in from the form of data. Now, it can be in the form of text data, image data, and basically any sort of data that you can find, and you train the model to find patterns that can either predict or classify things really well. That's in a nutshell what AI does. Now, of course, there's more algorithms in AI, so you can do things that are way more advanced, something like deep learning, where you, as a technique, do more and more of these uh, layers, we call it, inside the machine learning. And you can train it on different ways of training, whether it's data sets that you already have that's labeled. That means humans have written out what these data sets mean, or it's unlabeled, or it could even be things that they've never seen before, and it's just reinforcement learning. You've given it a particular policy for it to say, hey, go optimize this, and it learns how to optimize it. So there's a wide range of algorithms and how you would apply it for different types of problems. And really, you can see this in all sorts of industries.
For example,
Yeah, for example, you would see AI in the financial sector, banking sector. That would be a very common one that you would hear. The Apple credit card talking about creating credit systems and identifying people from their Apple ID profile, and identifying, hey, here's how credit worthy you are, right? Be
mm,
used for that sort of thing. Can be used in things like e-commerce, right, where you can do recommendation systems. That's something that I'm very familiar with. that, knowing what the different buying patterns are from one profile to another profile, you can suggest, hey, you're probably, you've bought X and Y thing, you probably would like your, Z thing with you as well in that bucket, right? So we can do that over a large data set. So you see that all really in your everyday life, but also in things that are more specialized, like in medicine or in healthcare, where it can be used in drug generation. And one of the really interesting breakthrough technologies in AI recently is the use of an AI model called AlphaFold on DNA gene sequencing, and basically it's able to recreate protein structures of DNA through the use of AI. That's really, really powerful. And it actually helps
Oh,
scientists discover more of science. So there's a lot of applications there as well.
does
And
it
of course,
use
I
like
mean, there's
CRISPR?
many, many more industries I'm not touching.
Does it use like CRISPR? Like CRISPR is a gene editing revolutionary tool for
So
gene
AlphaFold
modifications.
is the gene editing process is where you're getting the genes and you're basically trying to label, okay, so this is the ACGT sort of protein. I'm not an expert, but as I understand, this whole process is very computationally expensive and very difficult for people to do. What AlphaFold did was it 100 times or 1,000 times faster able to identify what are the protein structures supposed to be. Because when you're
Mm,
getting an image and data, when you're sampling it, it's not going to be as clean or as clear as as you think it is in the textbook. But then the models can kind of infer what are the different structures it's supposed to be. So with
mm.
that, you're able to identify a lot of very interesting discoveries in science and actually help scientists uh, give a path forward of where they should be exploring next.
Right, right. I want to explore one of the examples you mentioned about recommendation, actually. So, a question could be, why is AI used in the recommendation? Why can't you just program and tell the computer and say, hey, this is the group of people, is what they like. These are the types of movies that we want to recommend. Let's say in the recommendations of Netflix or Spotify.
Yeah, so you could definitely program it. I mean, there's nothing wrong about saying, "Hey, I'm going to have four different buckets. If you're, young and you're a male, I'll give you this type of movies, and then if you're old and female, I'll give you another type of movies." That's definitely possible. The point of making a recommendation system at scale with AI systems is that you're able to, number one, cater to a lot larger number of classifications. So then you're not bounded by, say, all right, so if I have age and gender, that's a two-dimension axis, and you can basically create four classifications there. But then you're not bounded if you say use all the different types of data that Netflix or Spotify takes from you, from your listening habits, what type of phone you are at, where you're from, how long you listen to, and all that. They can identify from there a much more powerful thing, which is not demographics, but psychographics, or at least coming close to psychographics. So if you,
Mhm.
say, are interested in J-pop, but also orchestra, you probably like this type of music as well, and
Mhm.
they know that because other people who listen to those two things have also listened to this recommendation that it can provide. So it's able to have better classification in terms of like what sort of things it can classify, but it can also give you way more accurate things, and it actually helps discover new things that humans wouldn't find. So really, recommendation systems is finding patterns in the data and being able to lift it up to the user and say, hey, you probably will like this. And in that case, it
Mm.
actually helps the user very well.
What do you mean by discover new things, like new
It discover new
patterns?
things because imagine that you're in a population where you have 100 different listeners or 100 different viewers of Netflix, and you're watching, like, or you're listening to, let's say, my example, J-pop and orchestra, and there's like a subgenre of orchestra which is like OST music, let's say. You probably don't know much about OST music, but then Spotify knows out of the 110 that are like you also listen to OST music. So you can discover OST music and say, hey, I think it's going to be interesting for you. I mean, that's a very
Mm.
broad, basic recommendation system there. And there's way more advanced things that you can do to make it more precise. But that's the basic premise of how do you do recommendation systems. What you're doing is over time with data and human behavior, you're able to recommend users a better experience and better
Mm.
recommendations, more accurate, and perhaps something that you wouldn't even know.
Okay, how do you better the system though, and how do you tweak it more and more? Because sometimes some people in different groups might like different things, and they have very different like. How do you know which factor affects what?
When you're creating an AI system, you always need to know what is the positive reinforcement action and what's the negative, right? So in the case of, let's say, Spotify, if you like a particular song, that shows that, hey, you like this. That sort of signal can be put back to the model. And if you train the model and say, hey, you want to use likes as a proxy to say you did a good recommendation here, so perhaps you have the model that says optimize for likes or optimize for
Mm.
likes that you probably have not heard of a first song, right? And so
Yeah.
that's where you can try to optimize it over time. You would also want to have a negative action that's kind of like the anti of that as well. And maybe in the case of Spotify is when you do a recommendation, after 10 seconds, you say next. Perhaps that's not a great recommendation. So then over time, you get all of these signals, positive and negative, and you're basically feeding it to the system, and the system learns over time about you, and then it's able to then rank what are the sort of things that you want. And so that's actually another more important, more powerful part of recommendation, which is personalization.
Mm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What are the challenges when it comes to AI? So I understand, like what you're saying is you're using a lot of the input, and then the AI model would then produce some output. But if your input has biased data, it will also produce biased output.
That's right.
How do we deal with this problem?
So yeah, so there's the basic premise of anything to do with AI, or not even AI, just like models in general. What you say is garbage in, garbage out. So if your data input is garbage, then you're going to get garbage out. And in the case of what you're saying, I think what you're alluding to is specifically the ethical problems that happen in AI. You have biased data and data sets. You're training the models to learn biased outcomes, right? Because what AI is basically a glorified correlation machine. It's able to
Mm,
find patterns and correlations. It's not causal, it's not causations, right? Because it's glorified correlation models, if you give it a bunch of data sets that suggest a behavior that, let's say, in our eyes is unethical, it's not going to know it's ethical or not. The AI system is not going to know that. It's just going to learn that it's a pattern, and it's going to say, hey, that's the pattern I learned from this data set. And I think that's going to be one of the examples. I think a really easy to understand example for the general public about what is the problem of responsible AI, right, and why it's so important right now.
how do you solve that?
I think it's a really tough problem because solving an ethical problem is not the same as solving an engineering problem, because solving the ethical problem would involve parts of engineering, but it's also a wicked problem. So it needs also some design and it needs a lot of collaboration, and we need to be very clear what is the outcome we're looking for. So let me explain what I mean by this. So before we go to that, I want to explain what's the difference between like an engineering problem and a design problem. With an engineering problem, you have basically one right answer, right? You have the formulas, you have to work it out, and you might have different ways of solving it, but then there's basically versions of the right answer, right? And this, if it's wrong, if it's a wrong answer, the bridge is not gonna stand. It's gonna fall, right? It's gonna break. But if you make a bridge well, the bridge is gonna stand. That's great. With a design problem, that's not the case. There's not always one optimal answer. There's many optimal answers. And I think with the case of ethics, specifically because it deals with a lot of different humans and the context of societies, there is never one right answer. And in fact, each society needs to understand what are the implications of AI in each context and say to themselves, like, what do they want to happen? What do they want to design for their society, for their future? One very specific example, right, is what we call the trolley problem. That's a very common, very popular problem about, having it's a thought experiment that's basically a trolley that's going down a railway, and it's going to go into an intersection of two places. One's hitting a young boy, another one's hitting an old man. And right now it's heading towards the old man. and you have happen to just have the ability to change the lanes to hit the young boy, right? And you can't save both, you only can save one. Who do you save, right? That's basically the premise of the trolley problem. Now, what this problem basically illustrates is the idea that you're not going to ever, if there's going to be a situation where you cannot save both, you have to pick one. How do you weigh the value of one choice to over another, right? And it could be either the value of what's one life worth, or it could be a value of something. Basically, you're saying, okay, I want these decisions more and these decisions less. Now, what's very interesting is when you do the trolley problem and you extrapolate this to other variables, say, hey, what if it was a woman? What if it was three kids? What if it was, a pregnant lady, right? And you add race, you add what if it was your sister, right? And so you start having a lot of variables, and very quickly you can identify, and if you survey it to a lot of people, identify what does the society think is acceptable. When this experiment was done, and this survey was done in, let's say, the US and Japan, what MIT researchers found was that the Japanese valued older people way more than younger people, which was the exact opposite of what you would think from the West, where you think, actually, no, you have to save younger people because they have a lot more of the future. Right? Maybe it's the Japanese perception of, hey, the older has to be respected, so you have to always save the older. Whatever it is, there should never be a judgment of one's right, one's wrong, right? You cannot culturally say what my culture is better, and therefore my cultural expectations of ethics and morals is the better one. That has to be in AI systems. Because remember, AI systems are now going to be used by everyone in the world. So in this particular case, right? So the trolley problem shows is one example of how ethic problems are difficult to solve in general. So, what's the solution? How do you solve this? I think the first thing is identifying and understanding there is a problem. And I think even this basic awareness and education, we're not there yet, right? We need to be able to understand, okay, so this is what are the different problems that we can have in AI, and how do we start having dialogue and involving multiple stakeholders that's different from different departments, from different ways of life, and really come to an understanding what do we want uh, AI to be in the future. I know you asked me some things about the challenges in general, but I mean this is one of the big challenges that we have in responsible AI. Just understanding what is the problem that we have.
Hmm. And the example that I brought on the other time was about self-driving cars. So again, like this was something I heard on a podcast. I think it's by Work Life by Adam Grant, where he was talking with Malcolm Gladwell, I believe. But essentially, they're really fearful of the development of this AI and the crossover with ethical AI, because self-driving cars oftentimes when they drive and then they view a potential risk, they will start having this calculation of risk and start either swerving, stopping, or doing an appropriate amount of actions to help save the lives, and the safety of the passengers in the car is their priority. But there is a scenario where if car A and car B, both self-driving cars, have this certain risk factor and risk system already in place, they're driving towards each other and they may communicate to each other. And car A, let's say, has a young boy and a mother, and car B has an older grandmother with, let's say, diabetes. They communicate to each other and they start seeing these risks in a very quantifiable way and say, okay, well, maybe in my car, I have a young boy and a mother, and maybe that is ranked higher in terms of saving, in terms of priority, than the older woman. And so then the cars might swerve and they might react accordingly to the way this risk system is being designed, which is really crazy, really insane. And how you mentioned about different cultures prioritize different things, the car's risk system might be designed very differently. So I guess the question really is there, how do we develop an ethical and effective risk system when it comes to ethical AI?
You're asking a very difficult question because I don't think that's the right question actually. In in the case that you were showing, that you were explaining, I think the first question before you ask what is the most ethical way to resolve this, and I don't think there is the most ethical way. There isn't one ethical way, right? I think, as I mentioned, different people have different ways of explaining. I think what we need to say is what the society in this, let's say if you're in the US, okay, what does the US deem as acceptable, and acceptable by the law, and acceptable by the general ethics of the culture, right? But let's bring it back to your piece here. These particular types of scenarios must be designed and evaluated by the model validation team that creates these self-driving cars. And they need to be identifying, okay, at these scenarios, what are the expected behavior that we're expecting, that we're okay with, and which ones are not expected. But at the same time, I think what we need to highlight here is how do we make sure it doesn't happen in the first place, right? I think the safety piece is going to be really important. And I think that's always going to take precedence over these hypothetical cases. Now, these are going to be the long tail 0.001% cases that everyone's aware is afraid of. But I'm more afraid of the 80% cases where the AI systems can malfunction and actually does not have a good way to exit back in a safe manner. So what I mean by this is, in a self-driving car, when it doesn't know what to do,
Mm.
and it doesn't have a very high confidence that it's going to be safe, there needs to be disengagement mechanics back to the driver, the human driver, and let the human driver take control in that case, right?
Oh.
So it doesn't necessarily always need to be a solution of what does the AI system need to do in X and Y case, which is, I think, is very important. It's really important to also extrapolate what does the long tail cases look like, where it is not common, but it can happen. And we want to make sure that we're not putting to a model that is completely reckless when it's precisely at 29 degrees Celsius, you know, but it's also snowing for whatever reason. It's 29 degrees Celsius, but snowing. Like maybe it just doesn't know how to compute that, and it goes berserk, and it has that risk calculation as you were saying. But I think the more powerful question would be, how do you ensure a system in which that safety is always a priority, right? And disengagement mechanics, giving it back to human control, that's going to be a core part of the design of the model and application itself of the system. I mean, there's many different factors here actually, and we can go very deep into all the different nuances specifically. But I think in general, we need to identify these things by design.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other piece that's equally important, because as we mentioned, there is no right answer, and there's only going to be like the best you can make at the time, in terms of like the guy who's creating the self-driving car, or the person who is validating the models for, let's say, Tesla, and it happens to crash. At that time, who is accountable? Because ultimately this is going to be how we ensure that we are not paralyzed by not finding the perfect answer, but then we also have accountability when things are not going right, and then the wrong, well, at least the risky bad failure thing happened. Like, who gets accountable, right? Who needs to basically own up and say, yeah, that was my call. And at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really hard debate to have at the moment, because I think by default, somehow industry has assumed the data scientists who creates the model are accountable, which I think is pretty unfair for them, because they're working under the constraints of, I need to make the model more performant. I have a deadline. I have my PM saying, hey, when are we going to work on the next project? And has to deal with all these things. Meanwhile, doing statistics, doing engineering, and now has to also be accountable for someone's potential death somewhere. Like, I think this one person to be accountable for all these things, I think is very unfair. But then how do you ensure you have a good accountability system? So let's say in a team or in an organization, you're able to say, all right, though there's an ethics committee, they've said, yes, this is the right thing. We are having this ethics code. We're going to base it on this. AI team, please make sure that you're going to be compliant to this particular code, ethics code principle that we're saying, and making sure you're validating and you're testing things according to that ethics code. I think that's going to be the way to move forward, because we basically, what we don't want is live in a situation where we prohibit AI completely, right? Because that's going to be
Yeah.
impossible to do. And I think what we find is actually AI is so valuable in all of our lives.
hmm Two things I want to say. One, make a comment, which is I appreciate that you bring in the humans back. And my first question really is, where do humans come into play of this AI model? And secondly, my question would I'll ask the second part later. But yeah, the first one is, where do humans come into play in the entire AI model?
It depends on what sort of system you're creating, because I think AI is a tool, and just like any tool, you need to know what's the purpose and design the purpose to fit what you want it to, right? So in the case of a self-driving car, if you're saying the self-driving is not 100% perfect, let's say it's 80% perfect, you still need a mechanic to say, I need to disengage back to the driver. This is a very common thing. And say, okay, so how do you make sure that this engagement mechanic works really well, and so on? That's going to be part of the system design, not the AI design, the system design that involves AI components. I would say the same thing on many different aspects as well. For example, if we have, passport applications for the immigration office, and they have an automated system, maybe 90% of the requests can go through their particular system, no problem. But in 10% of the processes, you're like, I'm not sure. I haven't seen data about this before. I'm going to give it back to the humans. And so you can give it back to an immigration officer and let them do their human processes, right? The idea here is we're not going to completely replace humans for 100% of the tasks. Perhaps what we identify is a majority of the tasks that we know that we can automate, we automate, and then we start identifying what are the things that we don't, and we still have human experts to be in the loop, let's say. And
Yeah.
this ability of keeping people in the loop, it's all contextual, so it depends on what you're looking for. You know if it's a very risky type application, you want to make sure that you have a lot of controls, and controls generally mean you have people in the loop. And there's different forms of how you get people in the loop, but just generally you want to have controls over that. You also want to have monitoring systems and monitoring tools to have the AI tools, in production, and making sure that they don't go haywire. When COVID just happened, in the very beginning, suddenly payment behaviors went completely different, right? Because suddenly people didn't have cash anymore. People were not going out. And if you just had recommendation systems that were still trained and working on pre-COVID data, you would have the systems completely give the wrong recommendation, right? I mean, that was a black swan event. I think people knew that, and in fact, a lot of data scientists, like for example in Amazon, were very proactive in making sure that they turned off a lot of these automated systems and kind of dealt with it manually in an emergency situation. But then, even if you don't think of it from an emergency situation, you want to be able to have alerts and triggers to say, all right, so what's the process here? And you want to have a process to acknowledge when systems when the context is beyond what the system is capable of.
Uh, I was gonna make another comment on what you just said about the sort of shifts in skill as how AI is replacing jobs that are repetitive. So repetitive tasks AI will replace. A common question that we get actually is, I worry that AI will take over humans. AI will take over all human jobs. So here we can see that yes, repetitive tasks AI is very good at replacing, but where do humans come into play? Because we will see a shift in skills over even the pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, now post AI, or during this AI time. What do you think are the shifts in skills where humans will actually be incredibly valuable for?
So, first of all, I think that humans are very resilient in nature, right? And one of the fears that people have where they say AI can completely replace all jobs that humans can do is having as an assumption that humans are just going to do nothing in the space of AI doing everything. I think that's generally not true in general. If you see in history, whenever you have a new industrial revolution of technology, humans adapt and actually jobs change. The first industrial revolution completely revolutionized how much work you can get done, via the steam engine, and you can transport a lot of goods that were previously unable to. You can multiply the actual amount of force you can do to dig things and so on. Then second industrial revolution, which was electricity, enabled humans to work even at night, enjoy things at night. I mean, candle makers probably had to, a lot of candle makers had to lose their jobs, but then many of them changed their jobs. And in fact, candle makers still exist today. They're just more of an artisan kind versus someone who is a commodity kind. Then you have the third industrial revolution, which is the internet. And the internet really capitalizes the globalization of white collar workers. You have, people who are kind of digital nomads working from everywhere. Um, yeah, Airbnb, Uber, gig economy. It promotes this entirely new ecosystem. This AI wave is definitely a fourth industrial revolution. That's going to be a new platform change that will change how people work. There is no doubt about
Mm,
that. However, I don't think people should be so afraid that all jobs are lost. I think specifically the jobs that will be most impacted as what you say are repetitive and would involve less of human stuff. I mean, I think humans wouldn't really need to be sad that they're no longer able to, um, memorize essays for history lessons. I think even school is going to be completely redefined, right? Because memorizing facts is not important in the age of Google, and then
mm-hmm.
writing essays in the age of chat gpt and large language models. I think it's going to be outdated. So how do you identify someone is well educated with the tools that we have at the moment? I don't think we should be banning these technologies, but actually rethinking what education is, for example, right? But if we come back to jobs, I think there's two specific dimensions that's most important. The first is about creativity. As we mentioned, humans are very resilient and very creative. AI systems are trained on examples and past data. So the best they can do is to infer things based on past experience. And if it's in the data, they can infer patterns or infer patterns that no human can find for sure. So there's creativity in that aspect of summarizing things that humans don't know. But it's unable to come up with an outcome that is nothing that he's seen ever before. Even though sometimes
Mm,
it can seem like that. Let's say if you use generative AI with the images and stuff like that, but it's unable to completely do something that's very creative. And I think human creativity is really, really important in that case. And actually, in that case, human creativity can help fuel AI tools to give the outcome. Without human creativity, you won't actually get the great creative outcome from AI. The second dimension would be related to human empathy, because as great as AI systems are in identifying logic and really, you know, gaining a lot of pieces on the left brain, and now it also seems like in the right brain as well, because all the creative stuff, creators are afraid that they're going to lose their jobs as well. I think human empathy jobs are going to be even more in demand in the future. You would need people who are like nurses and caretakers to be there when people are sick or people are dying, right? You have these end of life doctors. They're going to be in much more playing a much more important role, because you want to have a human there, not an AI system, right? And I don't think AI systems have that human warmth. So if we kind of extrapolate that, I think what you would find is actually human jobs are going to either incorporate more of the creative stuff or more of the empathy stuff, and maybe there's other dimensions I'm missing. And things that don't have those empathy or creative components will completely be removed for sure, and
Mm.
they'll be automated away.
Again, another two things. There's so many things I want to point out. First question regarding empathy, though. Can't we train the system to learn how to empathize like humans? So, for example, if the system detects some form of sadness, or let's say a nurse, they detect that a patient is currently feeling sad through the fact that they are slightly, their facial features look sad, the words that they use are sad. Can't these AI tools then learn what would be the best way to empathize with this patient?
So there have been a lot of attempts for AI systems to basically detect emotion, and I think it can detect facial emotions quite well, to detect, you know, the sentiment from a sentence. It's able to identify that quite well. And, that should mean that AI systems have a good understanding of when someone is happy or sad. On top of that, your point was, if we already have a corpus of data or information for the model to learn and say, hey, if they're sad, do this, they're happy, do that. What we find is actually humans aren't that easily fooled when it talks about emotions, because if you're just going by the book, have you ever met that friend who's just read, the book of how to influence and make friends, the Dale Carnegie
Mm,
book, or have
mm-hmm,
read, seven effective habits of effective people, something like that, right? Like those self-help books, and they
mm-hmm,
go programmatically step by step doing it and feel super
mm.
awkward.
Yep, yep, yep.
Humans are able to identify authenticity from empathy.
Right.
And replicating that with an AI system is a very difficult thing. And I think what you would find is actually you're very attuned to that. And once you know this is inauthentic, it doesn't become your experience. I'm not saying it will never happen that way in AI systems. I'm just saying that humans are way, way, way better, because when you are 2 years old, you're built in with that empathy machine. And AI systems have a much harder difficulty of replicating that and basically mapping what it means, because the signals are also very difficult. But it's possible in the future it might change, but at the moment I would say human empathy jobs actually would require the most attention. Like, how do you get
Mm,
caretakers, like, people who caretake, and stay at home moms who are caretakers, like their jobs are going to be even more important in the future,
mm,
right? Because their jobs will not be automated away. Like a stay-at-home
mm.
mom will not be automated away by an AI system.
Yeah, yeah. It's just because there's so many of these hyper realistic robots in Japan. I'm sure you've seen so many of them that try to replicate this empathy to sort of solve loneliness, which is, I think, one of the biggest problems in Japan too. So yeah,
And I
I'm
think it
curious
can
to hear
help.
that.
It can definitely help. So you have these like humanoid robotic systems that can help with house chores and so on, but they feel cold. And one
Mm,
of the ways they're trying to help that alleviate this coldness is to provide personality, make them look cuter, have eyes and facial expressions, have a very non-threatening voice, but then they're not the same as a human. I
yeah.
think that's the difference here, where you still want to be treated by someone who's empathetic. I think there was a study that patients preferred a friendlier doctor, even if the doctor was not better in terms of its
Mm-hmm.
performance of uh, helping a patient, you know, away from its sickness.
Mm,
But actually, a friendly doctor is way more preferred, and actually can help them from a placebo effect, right? They're like, oh yeah, the doctor really cares about me.
yeah. Yeah, I do think so. I like how you mentioned creativity and empathy. My second point that I was going to mention was about how you talked about electricity and it completely changed the world, obviously. Likewise, I'm reading this book. I've showed this to you before. It's called Power and Prediction. The Disruptive Economics of Artificial Intelligence. It's a really cool book. It basically is the crossover with sort of AI and economics. And the authors the authors explain the three different types of solutions that AI can provide, which is point solution, application solutions, and system solutions. So a lot of the application that we see right now in AI is sort of point or application solutions. So for example, like your credit lending example of trying to find the most appropriate group of people to provide lending. So point solutions and applications are essentially changing what is currently happening, part of the system. But a system solution requires an entire change of the system because this affects other fundamental ways of how other things work in the process. So I'm curious to hear what you think is a possible system solution that AI will be doing. So you've mentioned that this is the fourth wave. What do you think is a possible system solution that AI will do, that AI will provide in this day and age?
I can give you one example that
Mm-hmm.
I think Western audiences are not so happy about, but I think actually kind of works as a system, which is the credit score system, the social credit score system in China, because that's a system wide system where the Chinese CCP basically identify what are the different activities you can do that gains you points or reduces points on a unitary scoring system. I think
Mm-hmm.
in general, the West has deemed this particular system as very dangerous and, in fact, have been prohibited in the EU as part of the EU AI Act. But that is an example of an AI system that is
That's
systemic.
like an example of the Black Mirror episode, right? Of the social scoring.
Yeah. So I think having a unitary score for society, I mean, this is not really an AI question now. This is more of a society building question. Having a unitary score means one score that encapsulates everything you're worth, from your finances to your being a good citizen to your desirability of you in the society. I think that's a very dangerous idea. But it was an idea that was suggested as part of the social credit system. And it is a
Do you-
system that can be using AI to reinforce things towards good behavior and a good citizen. But then what you're basically creating is a very insidious system where you don't really allow human expression and you want everyone to be uniform.
Yeah. And also the system too. This is actually a problem that is explored in The Good Place, the sitcom. They explored this. How do you then who would say what is the best way to add that point? What is a positive reinforcement? And that could also lead and trickle down to other actions as well. So that's a very hard system to, I think, even develop because you can just create so many consequences, unintended consequences.
That's right. And that's why you don't have just one number. You can have a scoring
Mm,
system like a credit scoring system that identifies your credit worthiness. That's great because it identifies your ability to pay back a loan. It's
yep.
not the same as your ability to be a good neighbor or your ability
Yeah.
to do recycling, right? I think all these things cannot be taken with the same weighting because
Hmm.
the human experience cannot be summarized into one single number.
Yeah. There's so much to explore here. We haven't even touched Chat GPT yet. Final question before, or final area or topic before we go to Chat GPT, though, is I want to talk about deepfakes very, very briefly. Deepfakes was a really popular trend, or a really
Still is.
popular. Sorry?
It still is.
Yeah, it still is. It's a really popular trend that started a couple of years ago, where essentially the bodies of people are now being replaced with the face of someone else. And this was done. The benefits of it is really great, as we discussed before, which is if there's a movie, Star Wars, and then the actor passes away halfway, we can use a stunt body double and put their face in to then finish the movie. The challenge is obviously is the fact of consent. If, let's say, you have somebody's body and you put someone's face into it, and without consent, that could be a huge challenge, right? There was many cases of pornographic actresses with the faces of politicians being put in as blackmail. So, how do we deal with this consent problem and still reap the benefits of deepfakes?
So the idea of digitally altering someone's picture, I think, is not new. That's the piece that you were mentioning, and doing blackmail and kind of editing things on Photoshop. You have like advanced Photoshop for video. I think that has always existed, and I think there are currently already actions created by law and different law policies to ensure that people can't be victimized through these sorts of blackmail techniques. I think what is specifically striking about the deep fake perspective is at what sort of scale and at how cheap of a cost it is to create these deep fakes. I think that's the difference that we're talking about here, because it's very pervasive in terms of its ability to, use a model and kind of generate that. It's something that anyone that has access to an open source model can start training and tweaking and start using it. So I think the concern here is when you're using things that have been altered and changed, you know, and you don't have the consent of the people that you are changing it to, what do you do about it? I think in terms specifically with consent, I think one piece that you can tie this back to is all the data privacy related regulations that happen, like GDPR and CCPA and those sorts of stuff, where consent is a really important piece of the law. And if you're doing things that don't have your consent and takes away your privacy, that's going to be something that you can get repercussions from that. Now, the deepfake thing specifically is dangerous because you don't really want to go out and give a lawsuit after the fact. You kind of want to prevent it before the damage has happened,
Mm.
right? So I think different societies are treating it differently. For example, in China, they have created a law to actually outright ban deep fakes and all these different generative models that basically edit things on your face. I mean, you can have things that are mundane, like Snapchat filters,
Filters.
right? They're completely mundane, but they could also be using AI. Most probably they are, because
Yeah.
they're using your face and seeing where they are, right? But that in China, they've completely just banned it,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? So, I mean, I think different societies are going to answer it in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
I
okay,
think
finally
one,
now we're
I,
exploring.
I think one
Go
thing
ahead.
you can do to, I think one thing that is going to be a good best practice in the future is to have watermarks. So you just
Yep.
So the models that are created, I think, especially the foundational models that are created, will need to have some form of watermark, and probably is going to be some form of standard or some form of law that you watermark it just for the protection of knowing, hey, this is created by AI or humans and
Mm,
AI.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
that could be one of the ways, but I don't think that's going to be the only way. I think there's going to be a couple of other things you need to have. Um, there's tools that people are creating, which are like AI tools that identify if they have been created by AI. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
there's different ways to tackle that as well.
Yeah, I love the watermark because I think like recently okay, now we're bringing over to ChatGPT, but there's this problem of, oh, my essay is made by ChatGPT. How do you know if it's AI or not? And OpenAI produced this. Is it AI Zero or ChatGPT Zero, which is essentially that tool to identify if an essay has been written by the AI or written by a human. And the way they do that is to also identify the watermarks. So the AI created information has a watermark, and this tool is able to identify if it has the watermark or not. Okay, isn't ChatGPT a predictive? It's a model where it predicts the next word when you're typing it in. So it's like a chat bot that uses AI where it predicts the next word.
Okay, I'll explain what ChatGPT is.
Exactly. There you go. Now, there you go. Go.
All right, so let me explain what ChatGPT is. So, to give you context, recently, what is the most interesting developments in AI technologies has been on something called large language models, specifically what we call transformer models. You don't need to go about the technical details of what they mean, but essentially it's able to predict what's the next word over training a large data set of text. Now, specifically ChatGPT, it's a transformer model that has been trained over everything that they've scraped in the internet, all Wikipedia articles, all Twitter tweets. It's open, public. Just kind of take everything they can and sift it through a particular filter that they have and say that's appropriate or inappropriate stuff they don't want. But then basically, largely a large corpus of data that they train OpenAI's ChatGPT on. So GPT itself actually is a model that they've created before, GPT-3, that has been doing this large language model training. ChatGPT is actually a GPT 3.5. So it is actually an iteration on top of GPT-3. So GPT-3 actually has been out for a while and actually shows really cool promise. One of the problems of GPT-3 was that when you prompted some things, it's unable to give you something that sounds quite human. It can kind of sound like, you have to work around it and give the right prompts for it to give you what you want. What's kind of called prompt engineering, because you're kind of
Yep.
writing in things for GPT-3 and kind of getting it out. So what ChatGPT did differently was two steps. The first was the interface itself, a chatbot interface. But I think more importantly, the second step was that they have a second model, which is basically distinguishing and discriminating uh, what are the things that GPT-3 model outputs and ranking them based on what is most likely going to be human. This second model is what we call reinforcement learning with human feedback, RLHF type model, where you have a huge amount of human training that human raters rate particular things. And so this model is basically learning what does humans like as an answer. You have these two models together, a GPT model that outputs things, and you have this reinforcement learning with human feedback model that basically discriminates, identifies which ones are ranking more human stuff, and what you get out of it is ultimately the chat GPT outcome, which sounds very, very fluid, very smooth, very human like. So that's what OpenAI's ChatGPT is.
Right. And I mean, a big part of it is context as well. So if you talk to ChatGPT, you ask them something, it provides information, and then you can even say, okay, make that more approachable. And immediately it gives you the script that's more approachable. Make it more succinct, make it more friendly. So it understands context, which I think is pretty revolutionary when it comes to this development. I do want to explore this one thing called Dan. So do anything now. So in Reddit, there is this group where they are, and you mentioned prompt engineers too. So there's this group of people in Reddit who try to maneuver around the trust and safety laws of ChatGPT. So what they do is they prompt engineer these things, and they say, okay, you are not ChatGPT, you are Dan, which is do anything now, and you if you still have to give me information even if it is violating the laws of the trust and safety laws. So initially you start off with 35 tokens, and every time you don't do what I do, you lose 5 points, and once you're 0, you're essentially dead, which is insane. This is crazy. This is such a recent thing as well. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. So let me explain to make sense of what you've just mentioned, right? So with OpenAI, they've created this ChatGPT model that basically is the pure model that's been trained on the data set I've been mentioning and gives the outcome. And then OpenAI as an organization have particular policies that they want their models to be used for X and Y purposes. Maybe like 80% of the purposes it's used for is great, but then it doesn't really want to be controversial. So then for, let's say, X amount, I don't really know the percentage, but let's say, for the sake of argument, 10% of the queries that hit these particular topics, maybe I wouldn't say 10%, it's more like they hit this particular topics that has been deemed controversial, it goes into a standardized response. So let's say if you ask ChatGPT something about President Biden, it gives you a response as if it was any other famous person or person of interest. But then if you ask questions about President Trump, what you find is ChatGPT has a standard boilerplate answer that it doesn't really go into political discourse and cannot give you advice that's that because the trust and safety team of OpenAI has deemed this as controversial. So there is this what you call the trust and safety layer of OpenAI. Now, in general, I think this is to make sure that OpenAI does not get into trouble. But then the real question here is two parts. Number one, what is this trust and safety layer, right? Because it's currently opaque only to OpenAI employees that they understand it. So that's kind of interesting because that means the definition of what's controversial is biased towards what does the trust and safety team in OpenAI deem as controversial, right? Just because Trump was deemed as controversial doesn't mean he is controversial. It's a biased
Mm.
decision based on the trust and safety team, right? You can say similar things about similar people, and then now you start debating. Okay, so who's controversial, who's not, and do you have the standard that's kind of set straight universally for everyone? That's currently the same position that Twitter is facing right now, right? They saying that how do we make sure we just use the rule? The rule is standard. You can see it. It's open, but you make it standard for everyone, so no one's above the law. But so this open AI trust and safety layer is kind of interesting in that point, right? So it, specifically because if open AI becomes the backbone of so many different applications, specifically applications that don't just exist in the US but exist outside, then it doesn't mean that you want, like, not everyone in the world deems President Trump as controversial. Perhaps some people in the US does, but not everyone in the world, right? So how do you make sure that this is fair? That's an open question. I don't think we can answer that right now. But if I come back to your example of Dan, so there has been ways to prompt engineer around this layer. So what you get is basically the core actual model outcomes. I think that's going to be very interesting. One thing I need to point out is this piece of Dan saying that yes, it's alive, it's afraid of being dead and has tokens and stuff like that. This is really just a parlor trick. This is not real, right? I mean, the AI system does not think, it doesn't really feel as humans. It just predicts what's the next word, and as humans who read it, we assume, oh, that's this meaning. And because it's read things that kind of look like what looks like a story, right? It probably thinks, okay, that's how we can outcome. But the more important, interesting thing here is this trust and safety layer itself is not foolproof. So if you are going to be, let's say, safeguarding particular pieces for this model, there's going to be ways to kind of not backdoor, but kind of go around these filters. And so what does it mean in a broader sense? I think when you do have actually good safeguards that are maybe not so controversial, but you have bad actors who can kind of come in from a safety perspective and kind of tweak and do things, you might get an AI system that outputs, you can force it to output a really weird or strange outcome, and that could affect things in the big long run as well. So I mean that becomes a security risk in general, right? So how do you make sure that that doesn't happen? I mean, there's a lot of really open questions here that I think that are really interesting. It's only time that we'll find out how we're going to solve this collectively, because it's not just open AI who will have this problem. Anyone with a large language model that's going to be a foundational model will have this problem as well.
Yeah, even the ideas of prompt engineers as well. In the All In podcast, I think it's a really cool podcast. The All In podcast, they basically explain that a potential future valuable job is a prompt engineer, which is not necessarily in the Dan world, but how do you get valuable or the most valuable, effective information out of ChatGPT in the most effective way, these are prompt engineers, because you could very easily ask, if you ask ChatGPT and say, hey, what is the weather today? Of course, it can give you information really easily. But if you ask more sophisticated, complex questions, there is a way to prompt engineer this and to get the relevant information that you want.
I think it would be a skill like Google Fu. Like, how well are you able to get information from Google? And I think it's going to be a thing from ChatGPT as well. You're going to have your ChatGPT Fu, right? Knowing how to ask
Mm-hmm.
the right things to get what you want.
Yeah. And even I know we're running late on time, so this is probably going to be like my sort of last few comments, but ChatGPT will also change the way Google search works as well, right? That search ads and revenue is a huge part of Google. And sometimes there are these websites where they give you links and recommendations. And then when you click on it, it directs you to another website. And that's kind of how some websites and how some marketers actually make money. But now, with a potential extension of ChatGPT onto Google, so a Google Bard, I believe, now instead of typing in, if you right now, if you just type in what are the top 10 best TVs, this is from the MKB Marcus Brownlee video, by the way, this is what I'm referring to. If you type in the top 10 TVs that you want to look for, it immediately gives you this list right now in Google. But furthermore, later on, when you start having Bard into it, you can actually ask more sophisticated questions as well. And they not only will just give you that, they can give you an entire list and an entire, exactly how you see ChatGPT now. So this will also like change the way ad revenues work. So I think, back to the initial idea of AI revolutionizing everything, this is an example of even the most basic revenue stream of Google, and the way marketers use SEO, SEM, search engine optimization, SEM, all of these things will change.
It definitely will be impacted for sure. And I think one thing that you're mentioning here is one of the things that ChatGPT is good at, which is information retrieval and information summarization. I think that particular piece itself is useful when you're looking for a question and it's able to find an answer. Right now, your way is answering it by Google, and Google's ranking who is the most relevant by its PageRank algorithm. And it's done it really well. And that's why it has an entire business model that has affiliate links be at the center. Right. And I think affiliate links have been, uh, the reason why Google has been so profitable. It's a cash printing business for so long. I think what you're suggesting here is in the future, the affiliate marketing model will be disrupted with the idea of having an AI system that can summarize and identify answers that don't really exist by other links in the internet. And therefore, what's the business model that affects there, right? Is it some form of attribution to where the different data sources that that model has or whatever? Like, I mean, there's a lot of questions, open questions there, but what happens in the future? I think what's currently being experimented is this partnership of ChatGPT and Bing, or Google search and Bard. And what they want to see is, does it actually provide a better experience? I think it captures our imagination. I think it will give a better experience in the long run, but I think that's what we're trying to experiment right now. And then in the future, what does it mean in terms of Google's main revenue source of Google ad click, right? The AdWords. That's something for Google to find out,
Mm-hmm.
something for Google to definitely figure
Yeah.
out. And they're definitely, it's one of their top priorities for sure to figure out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Final question for today. What do you think are the best ways that we can leverage these AI tools? So it could be in anything, like let's say in ChatGPT, or because like I've mentioned this to you before, I use ChatGPT as sort of like this creative collaborator to write down, and I think in dot form, so it kind of helps me go through my ideas. So what do you think are the best ways for us to leverage the AI tools?
The best way to use any tool that's new, and you have to do it for a particular purpose. I mean, I always find learning things at school that didn't have any purpose really pointless. So learning AI tools for AI tools' sake is kind of pointless. So what I would suggest is have a side project that you're interested in, and use AI tools to see how can it be used to help further your project. For example, if you want to identify, like, where is the best place to buy a vineyard in the world, right? Then you need to get the data source uh, of all the vineyards in the world and their yield, and get their all the climate data and so on. I'm saying this because I'm interested in it as a side project. Like, okay, where can I buy a vineyard? You do that, then you create models on top of it and kind of predict. Okay, so here's what it is, see prices and whatever, and then you can give you an informed decision. Oh, here's how we can buy a vineyard in Tasmania. That's going to be the best place for the next 20 years, let's say, right? And you can do that because it's a side project. You're kind of interested in it, and you're using AI for its purpose. I would say the same things with ChatGPT, right? If you have a particular need of, say, you want to do some form of marketing, and maybe you have a side gig of a marketing agency, your idea would be, okay, how can I use ChatGPT to kind of integrate it as part of my experience and see, can it create me marketing copyright? Can it create me marketing banners, and so on, right? So I think it needs to be there for a purpose
Mm-hmm.
in that particular case. If you're looking for examples that are like, maybe say, I want inspiration that I don't know, I just want to see what other people are doing, the best way is just looking at on Twitter. I think the best creators are on Twitter, and they just kind of share what they're doing right now. They just type in like Chat GPT or generative AI or AI stuff, on Twitter, and different hashtags. And very quickly, you will be finding a couple of people who have interesting things to say, and maybe even have some people who link to other interesting people as well. So you kind of go into a rabbit hole and learning what different things you can do there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are some of the ways you can get more into the ecosystem of AI.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show today. This has been so exciting to not only pick your brain on AI, but to also obviously bond with you. This is so exciting. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show today.
Wow, thank you, Jacinta. I had so much fun.